Yeah, thanks everyone for having us here today at such short notice. My name is Wendy Gay and I'm a co-founder of the Citrix IE website with Craig Bramley. It's a bunch of us Citrix people just blogging about our own experiences of some of our new tech previews and just of Citrix tech. I'm working in Citrix industry probably 15 years and working in an IT probably 20. So I would agree with Aidan when I see people who are saying to me, yeah, my mum likes that TV program. And I'm like, oh no, I'm getting old. I'm a Citrix CTA as of this year, so delighted to be a Citrix CTA. And I'm joined here by Gavin.
Hey everybody, my name is Gavin Connolly. I'm a technologist here at Citrix. I've been working in Citrix now for 3 years with specializing in content collaboration, endpoint management and virtualization as well. So very happy to be here presenting for you guys today.
Great. So we'll skip on. So we wanted to talk about Windows Virtual Desktop and how it's amplifying virtualization. I think we're all aware of how busy Azure has been in the last couple of months and how many workloads have moved to Azure. And we wanted to talk about how Citrix and WVD works together and how Citrix has a value add on top of WVD and also some of the benefits and differences between Citrix and WVD. And I think it's important to call out that relationship and that Microsoft alliance that Citrix and Microsoft have had for years. And even if you think back, there's 4 times as many virtual apps and desktop services customers on Azure now than there was in 2018. And I know we are agnostic and we support lots of different public clouds, Google, Azure, AWS, but 80% of our Citrix virtual apps and desktop services, cloud-hosted workloads sit on top and run on top of Azure. And then we're going to talk a bit more detail. We're going to pick a couple of areas out in particular, where we're going to talk about using our virtual apps and desktop service to increase your user density, because of course we know cloud can be expensive. We want to make sure we simplify management, MCS, PVS, etc. And we're going to talk about how we can enhance that user experience on Azure as well. Gavin is controlling the slides, which is great. So one of the first questions we get asked is, what can I run WVD with? What's eligible? So this slide is brilliant. Obviously, I guess everybody's going to get this deck, but I find it really useful. Virtual apps and desktops can run it, managed desktops can run it, and virtual apps can run it, as well as essentials. A couple of things to note on this slide in particular is you need 1909 VDA or higher if you want to run Windows 10 multi-session. And if you're going to run Windows 7 with extended support benefit, make sure it's the 715 LTSR with CU5. So they will be the things I like to call out in this slide, but it's a good slide to have in your back pocket, I think. Just move around there. Great. So when we talk about a full WVD solution, what are we talking about? Because I get a lot of customers that say to me, is WVD Windows 10 multi-session, is that what WVD is? And I know there's been a lot of sessions on WVD and probably everybody in this audience knows that's not the case, that there's more to it. But just for anyone who maybe isn't aware, when we talk about WVD as an entire solution, we're talking about a Microsoft provided control plane, where they're providing the web access, the diagnostics, their gateway, the management, the broker, and the load balancing, all from Microsoft. In your subscription, which you already have, you're going to have Windows 7 Enterprise, you're going to have Windows 10 Enterprise, or Windows 10 multi-session, FSLogix, and Windows servers. And then also, followed by that in our purple box down here, we have our compute that's provided by Microsoft. When you're talking about adding Citrix on top of WVD, what we're doing is we're replacing that control plane piece with our Citrix technology and our Citrix cloud. So now you have our Citrix Workspace, which can now stretch between that hybrid environment that people are always talking about. You can have workloads in Azure and on-prem and all delivered to your end users through one workspace application. You can use Director, which is going to help you then manage and see end-to-end visibility of your users' performance. You've got our gateway, our NetScaler gateway POPs. I think we've 16 now around the globe, and you can use those to access Azure, but also you could use a gateway on-prem. A lot of choices there. We have MCS for our workloads, and I think MCS is well known, it's well used, as well as PVS for any on-prem workloads. Delivery controllers are going to be used to broker it. So that's going to be studios, consoles you're used to, as well as our Citrix load balancing. And one of those newer features is vertical load balancing, which I think is quite interesting. So we're going to replace that control plane, and we're going to connect those workloads, but we're going to use the HGX protocol instead of using RDP. So that's where Citrix and VDA work well together, or sorry, WVD work well together. And I like to break it down into 3 different areas when I'm thinking about that value add proposition. We're really talking about choice, experience, and security. So this is a pretty busy slide, so I'll just focus on a couple of pieces here. Choice, we have that hybrid cloud flexibility. You can run our cloud service, have workloads on-prem and workloads in cloud at the same time, all provided to your end users in one place. You've the choice to use remote PC. I've added this in myself because we've had so much, I suppose, usage of remote PC with COVID-19 in the past few months. I know Gavin and I have worked on particular customer engagements where they've had to leave their offices in a hurry, and they've used remote PC very successfully. We have the ability to use auto scale. Yeah, I know. Really, really busy. Yeah, we're all really tired. We then have auto scale in the which is going to allow you to manage those workloads. We've app layering, and then we've Workspace Environment Manager as well to help you make sure you squeeze every bit you can out of those VMs that you have in Azure. From an experience perspective, Igor did a great job on talking about analytics from a security and a performance perspective. We have our HGX technologies, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this now shortly. We're going to talk about Teams optimization in a bigger way because it's been something we've been asked about a lot. We obviously have optimization for Skype, and we optimize Citrix SD-WAN for Office 365. From a security perspective, we have our Citrix app protection policies. We have session recording. We have security analytics. We have a lot of third-party integrations, and that list is growing all the time. We now have Google IDP and Tech Preview. We've got Okta, which is GA. We've Azure and MFA, and more coming all the time, as well as granular access control. So move that slide down. So if we dive down a little bit more into the hybrid flexibility, and we look at this slide here, we have the ability to access on-prem, as we said. So again, choice is big here. We have Microsoft, we have VMware, we have Nutanix, we have anything that you have on-prem, including Citrix Hypervisor, of course. Whether it's in cloud, then we've got Azure, we've got AWS, Oracle, and GCP. We in particular have done a fair bit with GCP ourselves in our team and connectivity to that. And then that obviously extends then into Azure with the WVD cell as well. Just one tiny bit there more, Gavin. So we wanted to dive down into a couple of those features in particular, as I said, on that busy slide. So we wanted to talk about autoscale first. So autoscale works with public clouds. So whether that's GCP or Azure, but we're focusing on Azure here, it's going to allow you to make sure that your machines are on when they need to be on and off when they don't need to be on, so that you can then save money. So obviously you need your hosting connection in Azure. If you're going to use MCS and you're going to use autoscale for that. But we can then manage capacity and a buffer, have a capacity buffer of say 10% or whatever. So they always have some machines turned on if you need to. And you can also then work with peak times and have a schedule based on and off as well. Make sure that those machines are registered. If they're not registered, and I've done this in my lab, if those machines are not registered, you can't power manage them as well. And then you can pop into autoscale and you can say how much those machines are costing. It gives you a nice little dashboard to tell you how much that you saved. So that's a really nice feature that we have inside of Citrix Cloud to help you make sure you keep your Azure workloads costs low as possible. Move it on.
Perfect. Cool. So I'll go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about the Workspace Environment Manager and the Citrix Optimizer as well. So with the Workspace Environment Manager, I think it's arguably one of the most powerful and most important tools, I think, in a Citrix administrator's bag of tricks, particularly around the 2 points on screen, improving your server scalability to make sure that you're maximizing that output that you're getting from each box, and also then improve logon times for the user experience. You know, because at the end of the day, that's really you know, one of the big things that the user is caring about is the experience, and the login plays a big part of that. So very quickly, just to show you kind of a couple of screens from this, you know, you can do a lot of cool stuff in the environment manager in WEM, and we could probably have a session on its own diving into WEM. There's so much in it, but I just thought I'd point out a couple of features here. And yeah, and so with that, we have the CPU management, where we can sorry, go back one there. CPU management, where we can look after our CPU spike protection. So we can put a buffer that if the CPU hits 90%, we can then start to cool it off and cancel down processes to bring that back down into a normalized range. We can do things like use our Citrix optimizer, which is now built into the WEM service, where we can, this is going to help logon times, where we can get rid of any of that kind of those services that might be running on the master image that we don't really need, things that are sitting in the background, and it's really cool. You can turn all of those off to again get the most bang for your buck out of those machines. And then also we can do things like delete your desktop shortcuts and start menu items as well. So there's lots of different customizations that you can do, but that's just some ideas of those. The other big piece I think that a lot of customers really like is the analytics and director. And again, I know Igor went through and done a great job showing some of the performance analytics, but with the director as well, there's lots of great abilities that you have in here. So you can go in, you can power manage the machines, you can control the sessions, you know, you can see session failures, you can dig down into those, and you can do things like shadowing sessions and things like that. And there's a good use case for that that we're going to talk about a little later on, around the teams and a way that we can help you troubleshoot teams from the director. But I think it's a good one to shout out, and you know, people will know it as well as the monitoring tab under the virtual apps and desktop service. So then again, not to go too far into this one, because I know Igor done a great job, as I said earlier, but just to kind of show you again, just a bit of a quick run through on the analytics piece. So analytics breaks down into security, performance, and operations. So it's really cool because what you can do is you can drill down into a particular, so you can see it at a site level, which is really good. So you can see if you have a number of different office branches across the country or around the globe, you can see how well each of those sites is performing. And then you can dig down into that and see each user and see how they're performing. And you can break it down into things like logon time, session stability, and a number of other things. And it's really cool because you can have these kind of Boolean searches in here, so you can really fine grain and pick out some of those sessions. And what, you know, because it's using that machine learning and that AI, it gives you the ability to go and kind of preempt the user. So maybe instead of the user calling the help desk, you know, you might be able to free that up by being proactive with some of the information that analytics provides for you. And we wanted to kind of break out here, and Wendy had a bit of a use case that she was working on in her lab.
Yeah,
just show that there.
I thought this was interesting. One, to give you a break from slides, but two, we had set up performance analytics in our lab for testing. And what we did was we wanted to test both a cloud service, so virtual apps and desktop cloud service, as well as an on-prem service. I know Igor showed how you can connect the delivery controller directly to Citrix Cloud. So we did this in this scenario. And what we did was we put a workload in Azure East in the US, and we used an on-prem gateway. And what I particularly liked about this is it's not the red, it's the yellow, and yellowy orange, I suppose, is the color, and how you can now see from performance analytics perspective across multiple sites, whether it's a cloud-based or an on-prem or whatever it happens to be, that kind of brownout type of scenario where a user isn't actually having a full failure. So they're not ringing a help desk to say, my session won't launch. Their session is launching, but they're not getting a very good experience because they have issues. And this is I actually am logged on in a totally separate network today because my internet at home is so bad with my children. They're constantly on Xbox and I'm always getting kicked off calls. Ask anyone in my team and they'll tell you. So I did this test from here, and I logged onto that on-prem environment using an on-prem gateway, and you can see that I didn't get kicked out, but I have a horrible responsive session. My session is horrendous. So I can see that directly from inside of here. And that's not fake data, that's real data. That's me logging on from this house here in Ireland, in Dublin, and seeing this experience. So I could actually, as Gavin said, I can proactively look at that and go, okay, we need to sort out that lady's Wi-Fi. We need to sort out what's going on in our house. We need to get her a separate link, whatever we have to do. But it's allowed me to, it's allowed me to see those poor experiences without a total failure. And I think that's kind of very key for having a really good user experience when you're at home and your workforce is now remote at the moment with COVID and everything else. What is their user experience like? And I think this is fantastic for letting us see that poor but not gone experience. So just something I wanted to show.
Yeah. Perfect. And actually on that one, I was speaking to a customer 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they were saying using kind of a combination of the analytics piece and then of course our WEM that we touched on, they were able to improve their login times for one of their branches. I think it was by over a minute. So it's really cool to kind of hear those kind of stories. And with that, you know, we do collate those user experiences into a score where we take on board the latency, the logon duration, and so on, and we use that as a score, and then as you're seeing, we color code it green, orange or red. So it's really kind of handy for, and a great tool to have in your admin's back pocket. Perfect. So we'll take a look as well at Microsoft Teams and Skype optimization. I'll hand back over to you, Wendy, for now, and I can jump back in then.
Yeah, so one of the other areas that we get a lot of questions on is Teams optimization. And I thought I'd start with, why would you use an optimization pack at all? So if you have used Skype or Teams in the past in an unoptimized way, I think anyone who's a Citrix admin in the past would know that the performance is poor. You generally get a huge amount of high CPU spike, network usage is high, and it really doesn't scale very well. Because of those reasons, and especially then if you're running those workloads in Azure, that's going to cost you more compute, and you're going to have to spin up more VMs. Your density is not going to be as good. So it's important that we're able to optimize this as much as possible. So we'll move that on. So there is some differences. We now have, and I like this a lot, we used to always have with Skype, you'd always have to install the media engine separately. In the past, you would have had to put the connector on the VDA, the versions would have to match, and you'd be playing around with it to make it work. With the HDX Teams optimization, it's built into both the VDA and the Workspace app. We're going to talk a little bit more about that now. And I just put this slide in to give you a few differences so you had an understanding of the differences between the two. So what do you need? We have a blog on this on our Citrix IE site. So if anyone wants to install Teams who hasn't done it before, they can go ahead and have a look. It's pretty simple to follow and it'll help you get it installed and working. So the first thing you need is to make sure your VDA is at the right level. So from 1906.2, we have support for Teams. So any of those VDA versions above that will work. From a Workspace app perspective, 1907 or higher. But in this scenario, your Workspace app version is more important than anything else because it's the one that talks to Teams more so than the VDA. So the latest Workspace app that you can possibly have. And then it is included in the LTSOR in 1912 because it's post 1906. And the other thing then that's a prereq is to make sure that your Teams version is above this version here mentioned on the slide. So 1.20031 whatever 7. Gavin is too quick on the slide. Right. You'll get this deck. 357. So you need to make sure you're above that minimum requirement, and that's on the Citrix website. What I wanted to say about that is when you're talking about an LTSR, quite often I come across customers who'd say to me, but I want to use this new feature. If you go on an LTSR, it's stopped. It's like a line in the sand at 1912. So you'll get some features because I said a lot of the intelligence is built into the Workspace app piece here rather than in the VDA, but you're obviously not going to get everything. As things move forward, Teams is updating constantly, 2 to 5 weeks. If you go in an LTSR version and your VDA doesn't change versions, it's very hard for Citrix to give you the same level of functionality as you would get if you move forward with Teams. So with cloud, you're going to get the latest version, or with current release either, you're going to get the latest version of VDA, so you can stay in step with what Teams are doing. But just wanted to make everyone aware, just be careful of the LTSR situation if you want to make use of the latest features in Teams. So when we install Teams, we want to make sure, and there's only a couple of things I want to call out in this slide because I know we're talking a lot. Make sure your install is a machine-wide install and not a user-based install, and make sure auto update does not happen. So we want to make sure that when users log on, Teams doesn't try and auto update in a non-persistent VDI or hosted shared desktop. And we want to make sure that the install is a machine-based install and not a user-based install. And we don't have a load of data going into a user profile. We want to make sure it stays out of there. So we've put the instructions here as how to do that. That all user equals 1 flag is very important. And we want to make sure that auto update doesn't happen and that you control that auto update from inside your golden image, which is most important. And the next step to get this working would be to make sure you have allowed there's a policy in Studio to allow you to do HDX redirection for Teams. So you enable this policy and you'll see that reg key comes into play down the end, the MS Teams redirect support. This will only change to 1 when you log in via Workspace app. So if you're testing it and you're setting it up for the very first time, this is a reg key that you can check if it's working or not. I had issues with this when my Workspace app version wasn't correct. So if you're having problems, have a look at your Workspace app version, upgrade it or whatever, and then you'll more than likely be fine. But just I put it in as something to use for any troubleshooting when you're doing that install. And then if you move that on, I finally wanted to show you with Skype for Business, or top, what we had here was we had our Dicky Bow down in the corner in the system tray, and that's how you knew Skype was working, and everyone's like, oh yeah, the Dicky Bow is working, I'm good. With Teams, you don't see that as obviously that it's redirecting and optimized properly. So you have to go into the About and version, and what you'll see is your version of Teams, and if it's successfully optimized, you will see optimized for Citrix in the bar as well, and I've highlighted that in red. So if you are testing it, you're installing it, you want to play with it, then just that's how you know you're absolutely bang on and it's working. So I'll just hand over to you now, Gavin.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good. Okay, guys, just to show very briefly, just kind of to fly through a bit of architecture and how it actually works on this one. So on the top there is the VDA, the agent on the virtual machine with Teams installed, and on the bottom then is the user device with the Workspace app installed. So first, if you can imagine, the user launches Teams in the virtual session, and that authenticates to Office 365 over on Microsoft Azure, and sends back and forth some of the signaling data and some of the data that needs. Once then the Teams realizes that it's running on a VDA in a virtual session, that kicks off and starts talking to the Citrix API, which is built inside of that HDX Web RTC JavaScript. Once then that starts talking to the HDX team service on the VDA and kicks off the WebSocket service, which contains the WebSocket agent. And then that starts so once that's detected, then that initiates that virtual channel, that secure virtual ICA channel across to the Citrix Workspace app. And once that channel is detected, then the web RPC, the HDX engine kicks off on the Workspace app itself, and these guys are then able to pass traffic securely through that web RTC, or the new HDX engine as it's called. So then as a user then presses the call button, then the data is synced across to your Office 365 to determine who they're calling. And then that's when once the user on the other side of that call answers, then the secure connection is created, and they're able then to share media and content and so on using the various ports and those protocols listed there. So this is fully native, and I suppose that's a big thing, that we want to kind of have a native life experience of Teams in a virtual environment. And you know, we'll talk about it in a minute, but it just in my testing, it just wasn't possible without the optimization piece. And then we have the single point of authentication and signaling maximizes the reliability of the session, and just kind of to go through that. So it's very secure and it works really well once we turn on the optimization. However, if the optimization fails to kick in for one reason or another, and we do have built in as well that fallback mode, so the ability then to fall back to your webcam redirection or your audio and microphone redirection. And you can see that in your device settings. You'll see the Citrix HDX web camera as you would have done before. So that's just a tip. Another tip, and I suppose this was kind of what I alluded to earlier in the director or in the monitoring tab, is that if you're troubleshooting, if a customer calls or an end user calls and says, hey, I'm not able to see Teams, or Teams isn't working, or it looks bad, or whatever, you can go in and dig into the session and come in and look at the activity manager on the session. And what you can do is, if you see the WebSocket agent.exe running, that means that the optimization is taking place. So if that was missing, you know that something's wrong, the optimization isn't enabled, or the service didn't kick in, but it's just something that might point you in the right direction when troubleshooting this. And the other piece that you can use as well is the HDX monitor. So this is a cool tool that lets you add, once you add in the reg key here, as said, you can go and dig inside that virtual channel that we talked about between the client and the VDA. And we can kind of see inside and give us more insight into the packets and into the data that's been passed to and from. With that, then another good thing is that we did notice one thing that we came across when troubleshooting is that some antivirus and desktop security software can interfere with that WebSocket service that we talked about before. So I think it's important to call out to make sure that the proper exclusions are in place if you guys are going to be running that Teams optimization, because it's something that can trip us up. The logs were useful when troubleshooting this, and that's where they're available. And I just wanted to call out this article as well. To be honest, guys, I think it is probably one of the better KB articles that I've seen in recent times on Citrix. If you see here, it's like a manual, and it breaks everything down really clear, really step by step. If you guys come across any issues, a lot of the stuff is addressed in this article, and it goes through and tells you lots of different troubleshooting steps and tips. Yeah, there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there that really kind of so I won't go down too much, but it's in the deck, and as I said, you'll get the deck after the call.
This optimization pack, worth mentioning, I suppose there, Gavin, is that it's across Windows and WVD. It's not just tied to one OS. Exactly.
It's across the board. Yeah. Now there is a couple of known limitations. For example, screen sharing. Obviously, Teams we're now optimizing screen sharing in Teams, which is great. It wasn't optimized before in Skype. But for that optimization to happen, an active call is required to share your screen within Teams on a virtual machine. So that is one caveat. You can't just be in a chat and then share the screen. There has to be an active call in place. The other thing is that hit buttons to answer and end calls are not supported, but volume up and down are supported. So if you have external devices, that will work. And that's another thing just about external devices. If you are using peripherals and you switch them mid-call, just expect that you might see some sort of delay, maybe some lagging and so on. That's something that we know is a limitation there. There is a URL there just for the list of known limitations there. So if that list grows or decreases, you can track it there on that link. And then just very quickly, just around the endpoint requirements, I mean, it covers a wide range of endpoints here, but there is a documented list that you can find on the Citrix documentation on that. And just to call out as well that it is available on Linux. So we do support audio Teams optimization on Linux, and also just in 2006, which was just 2 weeks ago, I think was released, we now have tech preview for screen sharing and video optimization as well. But there's a list of kind of some of the thin clients that you have as an option, and as I said, they're on the system requirements page on the Citrix docs, which I can link to. You have the full list of what clients this is supported for. So very quickly, I suppose one of the big things that we noticed when we were testing and demoing this in the lab over the last few months was the CPU spikes that we were seeing for Teams when we weren't optimized. And this was with only one user running that you're seeing here, and we're already hitting 13% CPU on the machine. And in actual fact, Wendy, keep me honest here, I think we hit 25% at one stage. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that was me. Like, on my bad Wi-Fi.
Yeah. But if you think, guys, that's only one user with just Teams running. There was no other, serious application running. So if you have a user that's, they're on their Chrome as well, or they're, on an Office 365 app or whatever the case may be, and then if this is a WVD multi-session and you want to have several users on there, you're not going to get much bang for your buck out of the machine, and it's going to lead to awful experience. So I'll just show you very briefly what that kind of looked like on this one. And so this was one that we done in the lab. This was Wendy was testing with one of our colleagues, Colin, and she had a video call there, and you'll see kind of the result of when the call kicks in. So again, this is unoptimized, so we haven't turned on the Citrix optimization yet. And just a point on this is that actually this video was much better than the experience that I had when I was testing this. When I was testing this, it wasn't able to do video. It was taking still images, and sometimes wasn't even, it was just gray screen or blackout screen. But you can see here, even with this experience was better than mine, and it's still grainy, it's laggy, it's just not usable at all. Bad video quality, bad audio, and there's not a lot that they can do. And as well, if we push forward in the video slightly, you'll see here, as I said, this starts to spike the CPU usage, and it hits. Yeah, exactly. Again, this is just one user. So go next. So then when we turn on our optimization, we see a drastic improvement. So what we were seeing was it was always sitting below 2%. So it went from kind of the 15, 16, 17 down to kind of 2 and below, and as low as under 1% at one stage. And you'll see that here now. So then you have clear audio. It's much more native-like, you wouldn't really know that you're in a virtual session, and that the video is in real time, the audio is fully synced. And I actually had some feedback from a finance customer in the UK, where they a couple of weeks ago, they said that they were, we just joined a call for a catch-up, and they said that week they had ran their first team meeting where all, I don't know if it was 7 or 9 users had joined on a virtual session, and they had a very much native-like experience. So that was really good feedback from the customer, and I think it speaks a lot for kind of the big of using that Microsoft Teams optimization through Citrix and the HTX protocol. And again, just very quickly to just skip forward in the video and point out the CPU usage then, as you can see, the overlay, it's sitting low down there. I think I paused the video. Yeah, so it kind of sits all the time down kind of under that kind of 3%, 2% kind of mark, and even dropping kind of below 1% sometimes. So it's a really big improvement from sometimes when we were hitting up in the 20%. Fit a lot more users then onto that box and be a lot more productive there.
And what you'll also notice in that is in the client, you'll see an overlay for Teams, an XE that's running on the client device, and it will start to ramp up in CPU. So you've offloaded that.
Yeah.
And it's like with Skype, when you had an XE that ran locally on Skype as well, it showed you that you were having your optimization happening successfully. So there is that overlay that you'll see kicking off on your client device as well to prove that it's working.
Perfect.
Great. So I know we focused a lot on a couple of areas in particular because we were running out of time, and we kind of decided what were people most interested in. So we picked a few areas that we thought were most interesting. But I think if I was to talk about the top 10 value adds of Citrix and WVD, what does it add? I think we had that capability to have that hybrid multi-cloud. You know, people are in the middle of moving to cloud. They're not all the way there yet. They want to have hybrid rights. They want to have some workloads on-prem. They want to have some in the cloud. And we want to make sure you can do that. I think we've talked a lot about HDX and how Teams, for example, is a great example of how HDX is enabling people to have a higher density and a really good user experience when they're using collaboration tools. We've Citrix app layering, which is going to be OS application and user layer technology to enhance that user experience and create those images for use. We've Workspace Environment Manager, so while we're in Azure, we want to make sure those machines are working and being squeezed for every little bit that they have. So we want to optimize the density, every single penny. So we want to make sure we've got faster logons, better experience, and a higher user density at the same time. WEM is part of Virtual Apps and Desktop Services, it's not an additional cost. We then have our advanced monitoring. So Gavin did a really good job of talking about Director, that monitoring tab, and how we can monitor at an enterprise scale, health, track users, diagnose issues, shadow people, things like that that are really important when you have somebody ring you in and go, my session is not working, but why? What's wrong? And allowing you to troubleshoot that in a really good way. We have security features, like we didn't talk today because we didn't have time, but we might do it next time if we're allowed. Talk about app protection and watermarking to keep your sessions secure, to make sure you don't have data exfiltration. How do we make sure we keep your data and your information as secure as possible? We talked about auto scale in a little bit of detail. So auto scale then is going to allow you to manage those workloads, make sure everything's powered on that should be on, give you that buffer, but not have anything excessively on that you don't need to have turned on at any one time. We then have performance analytics. Igor did a great job talking about performance analytics, but I particularly like the idea of the performance. And we have security analytics as well, but I love that idea of it telling me when users are not having a fab experience. They might be having an all right experience or a slightly poor experience, but I now have a way of seeing that, and I now have a way of knowing that across multiple sites. That's what's really key for me, I think, in there. And then we have our session recording as well for security, and then provisioning. We want to make sure we want to make image management as easy as possible. So we want to make sure you can use MCS in the cloud. You can use PVS if you're on-prem connecting to the cloud, to make sure you have rollback and to make sure that you have as easy an image management process as is possible. So I did this super fast demo of Citrix Workspace and the WVD launch. So it's really, really quick, but hopefully it gets the idea across because I'm probably running out of time. I'm logging on as my test user into a test domain here. I'm using my Workspace app and I'm connecting to a WVD workload in Azure. So you can see now I'm using my Workspace app. So that control plane we talked about earlier is now the Citrix one for WVD workloads. I'm using HDX to connect to my session. So I'm using our technology and I'm using our brokering and I'm using our NetScaler Gateway service and I'm using our HDX client. So I've collected this desktop. You can see it's a Windows multi-session, super fast, I know. And if you go into command prompt, I'm going, who am I? So I want to say, what's the host name of the machine and who am I logged on? So you can see the machine is WVD1 and I'm logged on here. So now what I want to do is log on to the same machine, but prove that it's a multi-session. And I'm going to log on as a different user. So I'm going to log on as my friend Toby 365, and I'm going to log on to my Dublin lab because we're all based in Dublin here, if you haven't guessed by the accents yet. I'm going to log on to Windows 10 WVD. This time I'm using the web client, and as you can see, I'm logging on here again. I'm just going to complete the same test. I'm going to do WinVer, check the machine is the right version, and then I'm going to check my machine name. So yeah, it's my WVD1, and you can see now when I do a QWinsta, I can see Toby and myself are logged on together. So that's our Windows 10 multi-session machine running in Azure, but being brokered and connected to using HCX technology through Citrix. So I hope that session was useful. It was a bit last minute, Alex. I hope it was okay for you guys. And that's us, our
Yep.
whirlwind tour of value add on Citrix.